Hi everyone, welcome to the new Leader Series podcast. We're here with Adrian Smith today. He's the founder and CEO of Ripple AI, which is an AI-enabled business that primarily focuses around sustainability, which is an increasingly complex world, as we're about to find out. And Ripple and tools like Ripple can really help businesses to become more competitive, but also drive, as well as bureaucracy and the chore of looking at sustainability, but also highlight the areas of their business they could be more efficient, more profitable. I think that was really interesting from this conversation. You know, we look at things within our businesses as leaders that are hassle, but if you look at them in a different way and say, how can this help me to make my business better, that you can get real benefit out of that. And I think that's the type of work that Adrian is doing with his tool within Ripple. So without further ado, here's Adrian and here's the conversation. Thank you. Adrian, hello, how are you?
Hey David, I'm well. How are you?
I'm very well, yes, very well. I'm if you're watching this on the video, I'm in the Austin room, so I have Austin background, the skyline of Austin, which is one of the Engage's offices. So yeah. But yeah, great to see you. It's great to have you here, and great to understand about your business and your journey and the great work that you're doing. Obviously, Adrian is a co-founder and CEO of Ripple, which is an AI sustainability platform. I think we were discussing earlier, it's been a few years in the making, and now it's kind of 10 months old. So it's starting to take its first teetering steps, is it? I guess they're a bit of a toddler, is it, in terms of a business? Or?
It is, but it's quite a well-advanced toddler, so it's making large steps rather than teetering ones, I think.
Fantastic. That's great. That's what I hear. Bouncing around, going beyond sofa surfing and all that sort of thing for those with kids. So Adrian, what I always get people to do is just give us a little bit of flavor of yourself. You know, we're really excited to have you within the series and on the podcast, because I think your background is really impressive. But just give a bit of your kind of journey into this position where you're really like doing something incredibly innovative within the technology world. So how have you come to be here, Adrian, as a leader?
That's a great question, David. So, I mean, I'm a technologist by background. I started off my career doing financial service development projects. I then moved into a management consulting organization where I did a variety of different elements through my career. One latter end of that journey was a sustainability lead for across different industries, but primarily looking at how we could leverage data and technology to reduce energy spend in organizations. And then I continued that through into General Electric, where I had a similar role. And then I wound up in a financial services organization where I was closely working with some of their corporate customers, primarily smaller size mid caps. And whilst there, although I was looking at the technology ecosystem in a more general sense, I also was get exposed to those organizations and their struggle with the sustainability agenda in the European Union, primarily around some of the incoming regulation, and identified an opportunity to help the financial service organization get the data they needed, but also help those mid-cap small companies to reduce the burden of getting that data. And that's where the idea came around. And at that point, I started to create the platform with a close team and launched it at the beginning of last year, May.
Fantastic. Oh, it's a great journey. And just so everyone understands, because I think it's really important, you know, when we talk about sustainability, we're talking about this ESG world, aren't we? You know, this is something, if you are a leader, if you run a business, if you work in any sort of compliance, this is almost like a much feared word, isn't it? You know, this when that comes on the thing. So can you just give us just a flavor for those that don't understand, like what this actually means for businesses, you know, large and small, if you're in the EU or you're working with the EU, but just it's ethical in politics, and the way of the world, and obviously important for the world as well. So, how would you describe for people who don't really understand when they see those three letters together?
Well, I mean, I think the acronym is well known around environmental, social, and governance elements of data points for companies. But what happened certainly in the EU was a granular definition of some of their interpretation of those three areas, and that, under the banner of the EU Green Deal, certainly has come to fruition for corporates with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. CSRD is the acronym, and that primarily focuses on large corporations. But what it also does is include their value chain data, certainly from the perspective of those organizations in the environmental side, so greenhouse gas protocol, scope 3 elements, for example, but also across the social and governance aspects. Now, that requirement for the value chain means that smaller companies, even though they are not part of the regulation, are dragged into that equation, because to maintain their position in value chains as a supplier to a large corp, they need to be able to release or gather and share that data so that their customers, the large corps, can report on that in line with the regulations. And it's a large amount of data.
And I guess the difference from the conversations we've had, and I've introduced you to our business, which is Engage, in terms of this could be a very useful platform for us to use as a large organization, does a lot of work in the EU, is that you're looking at it in a different way, right? As I see it, you're looking at it in a way that, how can you get value out of this? You talk about value chain. How can we actually, regulation is annoying and you have to work through compliance, but the way that we've spoken about it is looking at it as a competitive thing, as a kind of market leader.
Yeah, I mean, look, companies, and I've walked in the shoes of these corporates and smaller companies, and it's difficult, right? So businesses are fundamentally trying to operate their businesses. There are many challenges already to do this. Recession is across many countries in the EU, and the addition of various regulation and more detailed requirements is only adding to that burden. So what we're trying to do is simplify that process without adding cost or effort burdens on these organizations, leveraging AI, so that they can create this data set and share it with those other organizations, but also B, start to realize that there is a potential benefit in these data that they already are present in some of these organizations, be it through integration with their own internal systems or gathering unstructured data from the likes of invoices, etc., and then taking some of that data and identifying where there are promotional elements in that to help those organizations grow.
And it's really kind of, taking that apart and looking at different types of data sources, isn't it? These are the key elements, I guess. Like you said, you come from the financial services industry. Data is used in certain kind of money market transactions. These are almost like different types of data that you're reporting on and looking at. Is that also kind of interesting work, I guess, to kind of, piece different types of, sources together and take maybe different conclusions? Because like we spoke before, like profit is quite easy, accountancy, audit, like there's so much history of how to look at that, whereas net zero reductions or certain types of diversity policies are quite new, aren't they, in terms of data sets?
They are new. However, there are commonalities across these data sets. And I think I think you touched upon it very well there. The interesting thing is with these data sets is the ability to identify through combination of data sets the potential opportunities, whether they're from an optimization perspective, whether they're from a reducing cost or identifying risks or opportunities, whether it's for growth or collaboration with value chains. So I think the really interesting thing, although the data points are extensive, is to use technology and, in this case, large language models, for example, to see where there are potential benefits that have been untapped historically, certainly for this cohort of organizations, the mid-caps and the larger corporate customers, to see where we can drive real value. And it's almost like a paradigm shift. So, for example, I think way back, and I've a proponent of the lean thinking approach to operational excellence. And back in the early part of the 20th century, I think it was Sakichi Toyoda, the founder of the Toyota car corporation, created an automated loom to identify errors in cotton manufacture, so that when it identified an error, it would stop that process so that downstream problems didn't occur, and it was an effective way of reducing cost. And that obviously evolved throughout various decades through to recent advents of things like robotic process automation, where you could do this with technology and identify certain actions that could be taken. But the benefit or the paradigm shift that large language models are offering mean that it can go the extra mile. It's not just a transactional improvement. Now, for example, the world that or the world we imagine at Ripple is that you wake up one day and you have an AI agent that greets you with an email or a direct message to yourself, and in that message it can suggest that it's potentially identified 3 areas of compliance risk within your value chain. And that would historically be great, and you could do something about it. But in this scenario, it's now saying, and it's already requested update documentation or coverage from your suppliers, and it's suggested that to the suppliers in a collaborative manner that there are cheaper mechanisms or sources of that or getting that compliance data. And it's identified other errors in some of your fuel invoices that have come through, or your utility bills, or energy rebate invoices. And not only has it identified these, it's already re-requested these, highlighting the errors from some of the suppliers and suggesting ways in which that can improve. And it goes on and on. It's identified that there are some of the staff have decided to move from cars through to rail transport, and it's created a promotional bit of news that it's suggested that you could then send out to these social media channels because that's where the best coverage for your industry are. And it's that proactive agent ecosystem that we are creating at Ripple, and we think it's going to be revolutionary for the sustainability agenda, and it's going to be cost effective too.
And that sounds like a kind of a business model that could work in other areas, and it could work in sales, it could work in marketing, it could work in other areas. I know you're focused around that sustainability, but I guess what's interesting there is there's a number of different increasing pressures on business, and I think we'll talk about the context of that. We talked a little about regulation, but there's a lot of different areas. But what you're talking about there, and we've recently, like in the last 6 months, done a lot more new Leader Series podcasts with people talking about AI and data, and it's really about the context of what types of work can you get the models to do, and what's the best that you can get out of them. I think we had a recent guy that talked about it's overhyped and underestimated. So lots of people think it could do everything, but not really anyone really knows what it can actually do. And it sounds to me there that you've pushed into quite a lot and really kind of prodded the beast a little bit and said, well, what can it actually do? Like, how can it actually help us, in real life examples? And I guess that's what you mean. Like, this software can really help people. It can actually do things for you that potentially could really make you competitive in your business.
Yeah, and I think we're only starting to discover the true potential, and it's an evolving environment whereby we're having these discussions with customers. There's a process of learning where there's opportunity, and then it sort of has it gives them a light bulb moment. Well, actually, then we could leverage this data, and data is key, right? So yeah, as long as you have data and you're able to then identify that data has driven value X, then what about X plus Y? And it's going on that journey with our customers, which is important for us, and seeing what we can do with the data sets available and combining those with external data sets to say, well, actually, if we think differently, then we can help you reduce costs, speed up the time, and really differentiate yourself as an organization in the market.
And when you talk in the market and you're talking to kind of customers, what are the challenges that you're coming across? Is it more like, could you could you solve these challenges that I've got? Give me a solution. Or are they sometimes, because people like the way things work, right? They can't really always see outside the box. Is it more challenges they're giving you? Well, that won't work because my way is best. Are they kind of opening you with open arms and say, please, God, thank God? Or are they like, no, obviously we're saying the business is moving well, but what is people's initial reaction to this? Because it really does seem to be moving the bar in terms of how we're working with these AI models.
Yeah, and I think it's a very good question. I think change resistance is inherent in any organization, and it's about demonstrating the benefits that are potentially available. And a lot of this is around stakeholder engagement. So if you are looking at holistically in an organization, you have to engage at all levels of that organization. So, for example, with one of our customers, we're working with all of their forklift drivers, where each one can use the application and register their usage of their forklifts or their trucks on a monthly basis. They get reminders, and there's a bit of competitive approach, and it's gamified for them. But then we are able to identify, or the system rather is able to identify the benefits being created, how they're improving their location versus their colleagues' location elsewhere. And the cultural change we're seeing in some of these organizations at that level is helping drive a more broader cultural engagement. And because we're driving cost benefit, say if we're optimizing, I don't know, an invoice processing output for sustainability purposes, if we're also taking the output from that processes and feeding it into an accounts payable process automation, then you have the savings on both sides, and the benefit from that is seen certainly from the finance department at the executive table. So it's about engaging all levels of an organization culturally, and also to demonstrate the benefits from a corporate perspective that helps push this along.
Does it surprise you when you go into each business? Because obviously there's so many different types of industries where it works. Does it surprise you when it's all similar? There's certain data sets like you just talked about forklift truck drivers, but I know that you worked quite a lot with the traders or something like that. When it comes down to the nuts and bolts of business, does it sometimes surprise you that this is all the same way of looking at it?
Yeah, I mean, every business has a cohort of suppliers that give them services. Those services typically are documented in some way, and that unstructured data needs to be processed for various business outcomes. So, you know, being able to identify errors, being able to automate a lot of that and reduce the risks of those errors, or identify where there's potential issue downstream, that's all helpful, irrespective of the vertical that your business is in, whether it's financial services, healthcare, global freight, whatever it may be. There are commonalities, certainly, and each business, has to make sure, or should really make sure, that it's environmentally sound, that it has the right policies in place, that it's using the right operations to minimize its footprint, that its social policies are there, treats its staff well, and it's governed in a way which is going to reduce the risks for that organization. And I think all of these things are common.
And I guess when you're looking at the data that you're pulling in from these different types of organizations, everything's kind of with IoT, that sort of thing. There's so many different data sources and data sets, and bringing them all together is, again, must be interesting. The feel I'm getting, Adrian, is you're working in a very interesting world, right? You're kind of you're moving beyond the norm.
Yeah, I mean, look, I set out on this journey to help businesses on that journey to become more sustainable. Now, that, I think, having worked with many organizations before, is primarily down to the culture. Now, the culture is a difficult beast to tackle, certainly around sustainability. And as I've mentioned before, a lot of people feel that a lot of this bureaucracy, as they'd say, is causing them more work, but it's taking them on that journey to say, well, you have data, we can simplify that data ingestion from whatever sources it may be. That data then can satisfy the needs from a regulatory compliance perspective, but it also is able to drive additional benefits operationally, reputationally, and growth focused. So I think that is the key thing. It's helping those organizations on that journey, and that's what we're passionate about at Ripple.
Okay, so let's just think about a little bit of the context. If you're kind of sitting here and you're thinking about like the product, a product like this is going to help you. What do you see as the key kind of areas where there are increasing pressures on business? I know we talked about regulation, but maybe kind of go into a bit more detail on that that you're really seeing in the market at the moment.
I mean, I think, the EU is front running certainly on the regulatory pressures with the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. There's the carbon border adjustment mechanism, which is also coming in, and then the deforestation regulation, which I think is towards the end of this year. All of these put burdens on companies, and I think that's the challenge. And there's also there's the SFDR, which is the equivalent for the financial services organization, who have to get that data from any organization, any companies that they are investing in, or any investment portfolios that they may have. And this framework that mandates these data points is the big challenge that a lot of companies have. And that mandated value chain data aspect to access that data, certainly on the first tier, or maybe as more granular as you can, is what's causing, I think, the biggest burden that we're seeing.
And I guess, the other thing is reputational threat, right? So, it's not number one, you need to get this right for kind of regulation purposes and pass audits, et cetera, and to get certain accreditations. But also, if you don't, particularly in some types of industries, this could be very bad for your share price, very bad for your brand, very bad for you as a leader.
Yeah, and I think there are two aspects to that. You're very on the money exactly. But the reputational aspect is not only for those companies from their customer base, but also it can be punitive from a regulator perspective, because there are fines associated with non-compliance, right? So anybody who then is fined or held accountable or highlighted as being non-compliant has a reputational impact on that business, and that then compounds the customer's perception, and that can have a negative impact holistically across their revenue streams.
I guess one of the examples they have in the UK is kind of the water companies. There's a lot of argument of whether they are getting fined or not getting fined, but you see a lot of noise with regards to discharge, etc., sewage, polluting rivers. That's a very live, real example of them not following their sustainability, supposed best practice.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great example, and the analogy is that some of those organizations try to be opaque. The water in that scenario is very cloudy, but what we try and do at Ripple, through focusing on primary data and getting that primary data shared amongst value chains, is to make that as transparent as possible, so that a company that is truly operating in this space, and we help them do that, has visibility throughout their value chain of primary data. So there are no estimates, no proxies, which typically historically have been seen as a sign of greenwashing. We get around that by having direct primary data that is shareable amongst those value chain ecosystems. And once people are, and it's in control of those organizations. So every organization on Ripple can control exactly what they want to share and what they don't want to share. But the culture of wanting to be more overt and clear about the data that you are sharing as an organization is only going to help that cultural change of being transparent on sustainability issues.
And I guess that transparency, again, sometimes is the difficulty and complexity of the data, but it's also like, I don't know where to get this data, and that's what you're looking at, And also, I guess it must be so costly to do this. I mean, this again is like a business. It must take so much time to deal with the workload, right?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is the real, certainly for the mid-sized organizations, this is certainly a burden that they are feeling, and it's it's people who have to be put in place to manage the process. It's getting the data. It's using your technology teams to access internal systems. It's managing the paperwork that coming through from your suppliers. It's engaging and with stakeholders across your organizational ecosystem. So it's cumulative. It is costly for these organizations.
Okay. So, you know, one question I've got before we kind of go into how kind of AI solved that is, we haven't really prepared this, but more in a kind of political kind of sense. Like, we're obviously talking about the EU here, right? So if we're listening, you're listening to the UK or in the US or another part of the world. Because the EU and its, as far as I know, it's the rules it sets, because it's such a huge market, has great effect. Even I had Brexit, that's why I was ever out the EU. It still controls a lot of kind of business decisions, doesn't it? Just because it's such a huge market, right? You know, if it says something, all companies in the world have to do it generally, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the UK has its own set of standards that it's putting in place. I think this June, I think there is going to be a UK equivalent using this SB regulation. But you know, UK businesses do a lot of business in the European Union, so there is a certain requirement from a revenue perspective that in order for them to do it. But again, if they want to maintain their position in supply chains, it makes sense for UK organizations to have this data at hand or be able to leverage this data at hand quite quickly. And it's the same challenges for them getting the data, augmenting that data in the right data model so that they can then satisfy multiple requests from multiples of their customers.
And so my next question is, you know, with regards to maybe more like changing, you know, almost like the battle, isn't it, between like people that say like we don't need to be so sustainable, we don't need to be so green, you know, let's say the kind of the more populist side. Do you see that in a kind of, when you're speaking to customers, say, well, we don't really need to worry about it so much, or we're not entirely sure? I guess that's part of a problem, right? I don't really know what the ethics of the next 4 or 5 years will be. Are we going to be mining more oil? Are we, you know, pulling more oil out of the ground? Are we going to be going towards net zero? Did you see that as a problem for your clients?
I think a lot of them understand the need, and it's becoming more and more clear in their strategies or their mission. They want to be sustainable. Again, it's just the challenges that they are encountering from the burden of demonstrably showing their adherence to these regulations, which is problematic. And I think the demands from some, as I mentioned, those larger corporations that are pulling the data from these smaller organizations is causing them a challenge. But a lot of the companies, you know, if they could, they would be more and more sustainable. It's just the cost associated, and that's where we try and lower that cost base by leveraging AI to help them with that journey.
Yeah. And how can how, you know, obviously there's many different problems within business, but talking about sustainability, you know, how do you see AI and therefore kind of Ripple being able to provide solutions? You know, what are the key things that AI can do?
Um, there are a number of different areas that certainly we're leveraging large language models to assist with, from automating. There's a quite challenging element of global regulations in ESG called the materiality or double materiality assessment, where you have to review a number of different categories and work out whether that's material to your business financially or whether that's material to society in general as an issue. And that's a complex process. We can leverage AI to assist in that process to get it 80 to 90% of the way complete. And then it enables an organization to take that, customize it themselves and engage with their stakeholders to finalize that process. Equally, report generation. There are great leaps and bounds in some of these large language models whereby the complex generation of certain reports, whether they're aligned to regulations or other, are quite, or a lot more simply, enabled through the use of large language models. And as I mentioned earlier, the advent or the emergence of these AI agent ecosystem means that there are multiple layered benefits not only in the sustainability space, but more operationally across an organization's key processes that can be generated from leveraging these agents. So as I mentioned, an agent that references that it's processed all your invoices, is integrated with your accounts payable, but it also has identified potential initiatives to reduce your carbon footprint, and it's suggested how it would go about doing those and who in your organization to engage on that basis. So I think it's and you hit the nail on the head earlier when you mentioned, that we're only starting to see some of the potential benefits, and it's an iterative process. Once these organizations evolve into being more advanced and engaged with the sustainability agenda, there are data sets that we can use to increase the benefit for them and for also the sustainability agenda.
So, and we talked to many startups. It's because of where Ripple has kind of come into being. It's very much like an AI-driven, AI-enabled business, right? Obviously the fundamental principles are sort of the same, but do you think that without AI, Ripple could exist or provide the same level of services? Would it, is it a, this is possible because we have these tools now?
I think what the tools, what AI enables us to do is lower the friction. So we could exist. We would be able to automate a lot of the data processing, but there would still be a lot of manual entry. There would still be a lot of of the customer interaction with the whole process, and that would still cause a pain for them. The cost wouldn't be, or the reduction in cost wouldn't be as great. So I think that's the benefit certainly the large language models that we're using are currently giving us, and it helps in that by doing that, it helps those companies become more accustomed and engaged with the sustainability agenda, which can only be beneficial because they will then go on to identify new ways in which they can be more sustainable, they can engage their staff more generally, and they can structure their business to be more tightly governed in the context of these regulations, and that only can be a benefit. And then these new opportunities that are arising every day once these companies rather have come on that journey, have become more aware sustainability wise, and they identify these new data sets that when combined with historical ones and the leveraging of AI agents can open new avenues for growth, for cost reduction, and for reputational enhancement.
And then I guess my next question is, thinking about it as an AI-enabled business, and this is a startup business. So when you first started thinking about it, I guess you first started thinking about it from how can AI help us solve this problem, right? These are the problems, these are the contexts, this is how can we provide this solution. Would you, because what I'm coming to here is, obviously large consultancies have big sustainability departments, right? And in a previous podcast I had, one of the things that the guy said was AI is a leveler, right? It allows startups to compete with bigger businesses because you can think about this in a completely different way. I can come at this in a completely different way, and I haven't got all the people and all the history and all the legacy and all the structure. I can kind of come at it and reinvent the wheel, Do you feel that's a real competitive edge for you against, I don't know, like, I see you work for Accenture or something like that, who's probably got a sustainability department. I can go in and I can do everything you can do without the baggage.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's no way I would even state that I'm going to compete with the large organizations such as that, but
we haven't really got. We're taking big steps. We're not quite running along with the big beasts yet.
Yeah, exactly. Not quite a leap forward that. But look, having worked in these organizations, a lot of the companies that I've talked to when I was working at the financial services organization, trying to help them understand how to get the data, they're too small for these large corporations. They couldn't afford the costs associated with these large corporations. And I think they're the missing cohort that hasn't been helped out by advances in technologies to date that haven't been catered for, or have to bear a reasonable cost for some of these consultancies that are sort of mid-market consultancies. And I think that, look, there's a tidal wave of change coming, and I think LLMs are driving that agenda. And that's where I think we're trying to help those organizations in that front.
So it's, they talk about it in Germany in the Mittelstand, don't they? The mid-sized businesses, which, I don't know, the German economy isn't not doing so well at the moment, but that's been the driver of the last 30, 40 years of the real German economy in terms of these medium-sized businesses, and the increased regulation on medium-sized businesses is making it harder and harder for them. And this is something that can kind of redress that balance, because yes, they can't go and spend, 3 months of McKinsey or someone like that.
No, exactly. And I think, that's the exact kind of organization, whether it's in Germany, across Europe, in the UK, elsewhere, that really get hit hard. Like, they've forgotten small and mid-sized companies who, although, the EU, to be fair, in the EU, they have done a good job in producing a voluntary standard for these organizations. It's still burdensome. It's still difficult to get the data, even though the standard to report is lessened. Getting the data, aggregating that data, putting it in the right format, doing the calculations, et cetera, is still challenging for them. And I think, the bureaucracy that is generated by some of these central bodies, they haven't walked in the shoes of these organizations, which we have. And that's why we see that leveraging AI to help those organizations will bring them to the table. And it's important because, as you mentioned, the Mittelstand organizations in Germany, I think similar to the UK and elsewhere in Europe, there are about 90+% of the GDP of these organizations. So they have to have a voice. They have to have somebody who is helping them with this burden. And that's certainly what we're trying to do at Ripple.
Fantastic. And what sort of sectors are you seeing real kind of benefit? Where are your kind of core markets that you're working with? And give us a few examples maybe of how, like, real life examples. I know you mentioned the forklift truck drivers, which I love a forklift truck. I'm fascinated by them, but do some other good examples.
We have found a lot of traction with industries that have a heavy invoice usage. So, organizations like global freight, shipping, haulage, construction, et cetera, or large purchasing organizations like healthcare, et cetera, who have multiple goods that they bring on board to their organization in order to create their services, have a need for assistance. And for example, one organization, a global freight business, who have multiple vehicles in their fleet, some owned, some leased. Often individual drivers will be adding in data or using fuel cards to get in fuel and onto their vehicles. And the invoices that come through are erroneous. There are mistypings. There are rubber, stamps of receipt on them, et cetera. It's very difficult for people to process those. And what we're doing is processing all of those invoices, identifying where there are mistakes. The AI infers what the actual reality is and corrects those. Or if there are problems with the supplier, they will integrate with the supplier and recommend improvements with that supplier so that it doesn't go down, as I mentioned earlier, without stopping the loom, the Jidoka process in lean thinking. It catches the problem early, stops the problem disseminating down into the processes of the business and causing waste and cost in those organizations. So at the moment, it's the organizations across, but we're dealing with solar power companies, we're dealing with organizations, the legal firms, or it seems that everybody in the mid-cap, but small to mid-cap space have these issues, and that's where we want to help.
That's interesting, isn't it, really? Because then what you're talking about then is obviously the audit, the compliance requirements, the hassle. When it comes down to it, if you did this more efficiently and better and use this data better, this could actually increase your profit, increase your productivity, make you more efficient, make you more competitive. So, obviously people look at ESG regulations as being, in some ways good ethically because it's good for the environment. But when you actually come down to it, more efficient business is more profit, right?
Absolutely, 100%. And that's what we're trying to communicate across our customers. And it's, you either do these in silos and you add cost, or we look at how we can harmonize these things using commonality through leveraging LLMs to say, well, this can be a benefit to me, but also not only a benefit from a reputational perspective and growth, but it can also reduce our costs holistically across the organization. And that's the mission for us at Ripple, is to assist those organizations, make them compliant, lower the burden of regulation from a sustainability perspective, but see where there are harmonies operationally to drive further, deeper benefits for these organizations.
And how do you see the future of this? Because I can only see this model and this way of working. So I guess I've got two different questions here as we kind of come to a close. What do you see the future for kind of ESG and sustainability in terms of data management? How do you think Ripple is going to be part of that, and what does it look like?
Well, look, being sustainable and addressing the climate challenges are critical. So it will be an ongoing primary focus for most businesses. I think regulations will consolidate. I think that, and they are. I think that there will be a tighter set of regulations globally adopted, but they will be there. The burden will continue. People will still have to aggregate this data. They will have to process it. They will have to then report on that to demonstrate that they're working together to address these climate challenges and sustainability challenges. I think that these are the fundamental tenets of the environment that we're seeing, and that's clearly going to be an ongoing issue for small mid-cap companies. So that's where we want to try and play our supportive role for these organizations.
Yeah, it's only going to become more important. It's only become more complex, but hopefully using the right tools is actually going to be a benefit to you rather than a chore.
Yeah, it's engaging in that agenda. And I think, because we walked in the shoes of these smaller companies, we know how difficult it is, and we know how resistant some of them are to this agenda. But if we can demonstrate through lowering the costs, speeding up the time it takes, and showing where there are harmonies across their other operational processes, that's where I think they will engage in the sustainability agenda and help through engaging their value chains to bring collaboratively a bigger impact sustainability wise for the world.
And this is a huge question, so obviously we've only got a couple of minutes, but what do you therefore also see as the future for an AI enabled businesses like Ripple? Do you see like what we're doing now is just the beginning of what can be done? This in terms of evangelizing this type of way of working, right? Because this model, I'm excited about Ripple because I can almost see that Ripple could be used not just in sustainability, but it could be used in marketing, or it could be used in procurement or something like that, right? Maybe you're thinking about that as well. I don't put ideas in your head, Adrian, but hey, you take over the world here. What do you see the future for AI enabled business, AI driven businesses being?
I think you're right. There's a world of opportunity, but I think what you've got to do, and this is the focus for us at Ripple, is listen to our customers, see where there are pain points that can be addressed using AI, and then helping them understand that there are other potential opportunities. And so long as we've solved for those problems and those are their key focus, we can then become a trusted partner for those organizations and see, that because the cost base is coming down, because the speed to develop these technologies is becoming quicker and quicker, that we can actually drive transformational change at these organizations, which combined will drive holistically bigger changes across society.
Brilliant. I'm sure that it's going to be a really exciting journey. I feel like we should make a date to talk in 2 years' time when you've taken over the world of sustainability, Adrian, and I wish you well in that. When you are then taking giant strides alongside the big beasts, if you know what I mean. Thank you very much for your time today. It's been a fantastic conversation, and good luck with Ripple as it continues its growth.
Thanks very much, David.
Thank you.